Have you ever had a time when it seemed like God was silent? When everything you tried failed, the doors closed, and the only thing left was doubt? It is at that moment, when we no longer see a way out, that our faith is put to the test. But what if I told you that, behind this silence, God is already preparing something much bigger than you imagine? This is the story of someone who faced an ordeal so difficult that he thought about giving up. He tried everything, looked for solutions, fought with all his might, but nothing worked. Desperation took over, uncertainty weighed on the heart. Time passed, and the answer did not come. But what he didn't know was that God was already working behind the scenes, preparing a miracle that would change his life forever. Often, when we are in the midst of the storm, all we can see is the chaos around us. We feel alone, forgotten, without direction. But the truth is that God never abandons us. The process may be painful, the wait may be distressing, but his promise never fails. God's time is not our time, and this story will show you that when he acts, everything changes in a way that no one can explain. If you've ever faced an ordeal that seemed to have no end, if you've ever felt powerless, aimless, waiting for an answer that never arrived, then stay with me until the end of this video, because this story could be the answer you need. Things are happening faster than we imagine, and those who are not spiritually prepared may be caught off guard. The world is increasingly unstable, trials are becoming more intense, and many do not know how to face the challenges that lie ahead. But one thing is certain, God already has a plan, and he never leaves his children unanswered. Now, more than ever, it is essential to be connected with messages that strengthen faith and help us see God's actions in the midst of difficulties. Many people are facing silent battles, waiting for direction, not knowing that the answer may be closer than they think, and you can be a channel of blessing for them. If this message has already touched your heart, don't ignore this call. Leave your like right now and subscribe to the channel to continue receiving words that can transform your life. And more than that, share this video, because someone might need to hear exactly that today. God has a purpose in everything, and this message can reach those who need it. Lucas's life followed a predictable flow, a routine that gave him a feeling of stability and security. He woke up early every day, had breakfast with his wife and children, got dressed for work, and left the house already mentally planning everything he needed to do throughout the day. Along the way, he thought about ongoing projects, scheduled meetings, and how he could further expand his business. He liked that feeling. Having control over his own life gave him peace of mind. He knew that his efforts were being rewarded and that everything was going according to plan. There was no reason to worry. At work, everything flowed well. Business was booming, customers trusted him, and money was coming in regularly. The bills were paid without difficulty, and his family lived comfortably. Lucas was proud of the life he had built. In everyone's eyes, he was a successful man, someone who had everything under control, and he believed it too. If someone asked him what the secret to his success was, he would answer without hesitation: effort and dedication. He always trusted that success was just a matter of hard work and planning, and as long as he kept doing everything right, nothing could go wrong. Lucas believed that his stability was the exclusive result of his own merit. Deep down, he knew that God existed. He was raised hearing that God was in control, that he supplied all needs, that all he had to do was trust. But over time, these truths faded into the background, not because he had stopped believing, but because he didn't see the need to depend so much on God. His prayers became rapid, almost mechanical. He was grateful for the day, asked for protection for his family, but his mind soon turned to commitments and goals. Moments of reflection were replaced by meetings, business calls, important decisions. There was always something more urgent than stopping and talking to God. He thought that as long as he continued to work hard, his life would stay on track. But life has unexpected ways of teaching us. What seemed solid It began to crumble before his eyes in a subtle, almost imperceptible way. At first, they were just small setbacks that he didn't pay much attention to. A customer who is late with a payment, a contract that for the first time was not renewed. Nothing that worried him at that moment. It's part of it, I thought. After all, business has always had ups and downs. But the days passed and these little problems started to accumulate. Financial delays increased, customers disappeared, opportunities were lost. For the first time, he had to postpone an important payment. He still believed that it was just a phase, that everything would soon return to normal. But he didn't come back. The difficulties grew. The flow of money has decreased drastically. What he took for granted began to crumble. The work that once gave him security became a burden, a constant source of worry. Lucas tried to remain calm, but the truth was that he no longer knew what to do. Every decision he made seemed to only make the situation worse. Every door that knocked was closed, and then the problems began to spill over into the house. His wife tried to be understanding, but he could see the concern in her eyes. The children, even without fully understanding the situation, realized that something was wrong. The atmosphere inside the house changed. Conversations became more tense. Moments of joy gave way to anxiety. The nights, before peaceful, became long and distressing. He lay in bed, but sleep didn't come. The mind was overwhelmed, searching for a solution that didn't seem to exist. And then came the final blow. The call he had been dreading for so long finally happened. His company's biggest contract, the one that guaranteed its financial stability, was cancelled. No warning, no negotiation. The decision had already been made. He felt a chill down his spine. It was as if, at that moment, the entire weight of reality had fallen on him. What would he do now? What was left? For the first time in a long time, he felt real fear. Lucas, the confident man who always believed he had everything under control, now he was completely lost. He locked himself in the office and sat at the table, looking at the scattered papers, documents, accounts, notifications. Everything there seemed to scream the same thing to him: you failed. And God? Where was God in all of this? He tried to remember the last time he truly sought God's presence. The last time you said a sincere prayer without rushing, without distractions. And to his surprise, he couldn't remember. At that moment, he realized something he had never thought about before. All his life, he believed he was in control. He believed that his effort and intelligence were enough to guarantee his future. But now, there was nothing left but emptiness. And then he did something he had never done before. Sitting there with his hands on his face, Lucas took a deep breath and murmured a simple sentence, but full of everything he felt. God, help me. The voice was low, almost like a whisper, but for the first time, it was not a mechanical prayer. It was not an automatic prayer, made in a hurry between one appointment and another. It was an outcry. At that moment, he realized he could no longer fight alone. The silence in the room was heavy, but inside it, something started to change. He didn't know yet, but that prayer would be the beginning of something much bigger than he could imagine. And now, I ask you, have you ever gone through a moment like this? Have you ever felt like your life was under control, only to have everything change from one moment to the next? Comment here, I trust in God's actions, and share your experience. Because often, it is in the most difficult moments that God begins to work in ways we never imagined. Lucas felt like his life was falling apart, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Problems that started small turned into an avalanche, and no matter how hard he tried to fight, it was like he was sinking into quicksand. It all started with financial issues. Customers who once trusted him began to delay payments. Some simply disappeared. Bills that had previously been paid on time now piled up on his desk. At first, he believed it was just a bad phase, that all he needed was a little more patience and everything would soon return to normal. But the days passed, and the situation only got worse. He tried to remain calm, act as if nothing was happening. After all, he was always a man of solutions, someone who did not let himself be easily shaken. But this time, nothing he did seemed to have any effect. With each attempt to fix the situation, a new problem arose. Then came the news that it made him feel a knot in his stomach. The bank refused his last attempt to renegotiate debts. No credit, no options. He realized there was no way out anymore. The company he had built with years of effort was now on the verge of collapse. And as if that wasn't enough, the betrayal came from where he least expected it. Lucas always believed he could count on some people, especially that friend who had been by his side for years. A partner, someone he trusted blindly, someone he considered a brother. But when the difficulties began, he realized he was alone. Disappointment came like a sharp blade. The one he believed to be a journey partner simply turned his back and abandoned him. Worse than that, he used his vulnerability for his own benefit. He made deals behind his back, took important clients with him, and ensured his own financial stability while Lucas watched everything fall apart. What did he do to deserve this? How could someone he helped so many times act like this? The shock of betrayal was a deep blow. He wondered how he could be so naive, how he trusted someone so much who in the end only thought about himself. At this point, Lucas no longer knew what hurt more, the fear of failure or the feeling of having been stabbed by someone so close. But there was still more. As if the financial difficulties and betrayal weren't enough, life dealt him another blow. One day, while trying to deal with all the pressure, she felt a strange discomfort in her chest. At first, he ignored it. He thought it was just tiredness, the result of sleepless nights and constant stress. But as the days went by, the symptoms intensified. Headaches, dizziness, inexplicable exhaustion, until the moment came that he would never forget. In the middle of a conversation, everything went dark. He woke up minutes later disoriented, not knowing what had happened. His desperate wife insisted that he go to the doctor, and then the diagnosis came as a final blow. Lucas held the paper in his hands, trying to absorb the doctor's words. The tiredness he felt was not just emotional exhaustion. His body was taking a heavy toll from all the stress it had been accumulating. He was sick. The news hit him like a punch in the stomach. How had he let things get to this point? How could he continue fighting if now not even his own body could resist? It was at that moment that he felt something he had never experienced with such intensity, the feeling of total abandonment. Nothing made sense anymore. He lost the company, lost money, lost friends, and now he was about to lose his own health. Lucas looked at the ceiling of the darkroom, alone, trying to understand how his life had gotten to this point. That man who always had everything under control was now completely broken. And for the first time he asked himself, where is God? He didn't know it, but this was the beginning of something much bigger than he could imagine. And now I ask you, have you ever felt like everything around you was falling apart at the same time? That there was nowhere else to run? Comment here. I believe God has a purpose. Your story can strengthen someone going through the same ordeal. Lucas was sitting on the floor of the dark room. The world around him felt small, suffocating. The silence weighed as much as the problems that accumulated inside him. The bills, the betrayal, the diagnosis, the fear of the future. Everything was spinning in his mind like an uncontrollable whirlwind. He tried to resist, he tried to be strong, but he had no strength left. The tears began to fall without him being able to hold them back. At first, they were silent, discreet, but as the weight of reality became unbearable, the crying turned into a deep wail, a suffocated scream of someone who no longer knows where to go. He had never felt so alone. Where were all those people who used to say they were by your side? Where were the friends who shared the victories? Now that he had nothing left to offer, seemed to have disappeared. He tried to ask for help. He called a few people, sent messages, but no one seemed willing to listen. Some responded with empty sentences. Others didn't even answer. It was as if he had ceased to exist. He got up and walked to the window. Outside, life went on. People walked hurriedly through the streets. The city lights shone as if nothing was happening. But inside, everything was dark. Fear set in once and for all. What if this never happened? What if he never managed to get back on his feet? He threw himself on the bed and closed his eyes. He tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind attacked him with painful memories. The day you got the bankruptcy call, the moment he discovered the betrayal, the doctor's look when delivering the diagnosis. The anguish grew. My heart was racing, my hands were sweating. He felt trapped inside his own body. I tried to control my breathing, but each breath seemed insufficient. He wanted to run away, but there was nowhere to run. And then came the questions. Why did God allow this? He always heard that God was good, that God took care of his children. But then why was he allowing all this to happen? Has God forgotten me? That question went through him like a cold blade. Were all those promises of provision, of care, real? Did God really see your pain? Doubt mixed with despair? He wanted to believe that this was just a phase. I wanted to believe that somehow everything would change. But how? Looking at his situation, there was no hope. That night, Lucas reached his limit. He had never felt so weak, so small. The confident and confident man he once was no more. All that was left was a deep tiredness, an exhaustion that was not just physical, but emotional and spiritual. He sat down again on the bedroom floor. He looked around. The place that once represented comfort now felt like a reminder of everything he had lost. And it was there, at his lowest point, that he did something he had never done before. Lucas took a deep breath, trying to contain his crying, but the tears continued to flow. So, without the strength to resist, he simply gave himself up. And with a choked voice, he murmured, "God, if you're still listening to me, help me." It was just that. A short sentence, but full of everything he felt. And in that instant, something changed. The room was still dark, the problems were still there, but something inside him began to transform. He couldn't explain it, but for the first time, he felt that he was not completely alone. And maybe you've already been through something like this. Have you ever felt that there was no more strength, that everything was lost, that God was silent? Comment here, "I trust in God's actions," and share your experience, because sometimes it is in silence that God works most. Lucas felt the weight of silence around him. His heart was tired, his mind was exhausted, and hope seemed to be fading. The dark room around him reflected exactly what he felt inside: loneliness, fear, and uncertainty. He wondered how he had gotten there. How could this confident man, who always had everything under control, now be completely lost? How had his life fallen apart so quickly? Where was God? The questions came like a storm. Why did God allow all of this to happen? Why did he seem so far away? Was he listening? Lucas looked at the ceiling with teary eyes, feeling a lump in his throat. There was nowhere else to run. He tried to fight alone. He tried to find a way out. He tried to be strong. But now there was nothing left but despair. And it was there, at the lowest point of his life, that something inside him gave way. For the first time, he realized he had no strength left. He tried to hold back the tears, but they flowed uncontrollably. His chest hurt, his breathing was heavy. He could no longer hide what he felt. Then he fell to his knees on the cold floor. He felt a shiver run through his body, not because of the cold of the environment, but because of the weight of the delivery. "God," he murmured, his voice weak, almost without the strength to speak. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, he surrendered completely. "Lord, I can't take it anymore." He took a deep breath, feeling the tears tighten his chest. "If there is still a purpose for me, show me the way." It was just that, a simple sentence, but it carried the full weight of his pain. And then something different happened. The room remained the same, the problems still existed, but something inside him began to change. Lucas felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a peace he couldn't explain. It wasn't an immediate solution. It was not an audible response, but at that moment he felt that God was there. The crying subsided. The heart, previously racing with fear, now beat more calmly. He still didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel completely alone. And maybe you've already been through something like this. Have you ever reached your limit and realized that the only way out was to surrender to God? Have you ever said a sincere prayer coming from the depths of your soul? Comment here, I trust in God's purpose, and share your experience, because sometimes the greatest miracle begins at the exact moment we surrender completely to Him. Lucas remained on his knees for a few minutes, his face still wet with tears. He expected to feel something different, to hear an answer, to perceive a clear sign that God had heard his cry. But the room remained silent. The only sound was his own labored breathing and the echo of the pain that still weighed on him. He opened his eyes, slowly looking around. Nothing had changed. The bills were still piled up on the table. The unread messages on the cell phone were still there. The problem still seemed impossible to solve. The world was exactly the same as it was before his prayer. He stood up slowly, his legs feeling shaky. He expected an immediate response, but all he found was silence. That night, he slept with a heavy heart. Deep down, he wanted to believe that something had changed. But did God really hear him? The days passed, and nothing happened. Lucas woke up every morning hoping to see some change, some sign, but everything remained the same. The phone still didn't ring with good news. The doors remained closed, and the answer he needed so much seemed distant. God's silence began to hurt. He wondered if his prayer had been strong enough, if he had cried out in the right way. Did God ignore him? Was he not worthy of an answer? Thoughts began to weigh heavily. The hope he had felt on the day of his delivery began to give way to doubt. Has God forgotten me? That question was pounding in his mind. He tried to remember the testimonies he had heard before, of people who went through difficult times and received a miracle at the right time. But what if the miracle didn't come for him? Lucas started to feel small. He felt a lump in his throat when he thought that perhaps he was alone in this fight. The days passed, and the wait became agonizing. Every second felt like an eternity. He looked at his cell, phone with hope, waiting for a call that would change his situation. But nothing happened, and then came the temptation to give up. What was the point of trusting God if everything remained the same? What else could he do? Should I try to solve everything on my own again? But deep down, he knew every time he tried to fight alone, things only got worse. He needed to trust, even without understanding. He remembered what he once heard: God's time is not our time. Then, with a deep sigh, decided to keep waiting. He didn't know yet, but the miracle was already on the way. And now I ask you, have you ever lived through a moment like this? Have you ever felt like God was silent, but then realized that He was always at work? Comment here, I trust in God's timing, and share your experience. You can strengthen someone who is waiting for an answer today. Lucas was almost without hope. The days continued to pass, and God's silence seemed heavier and heavier. He woke up every morning, expecting a change, but nothing happened. The bills continued to pile up, the problems didn't ease, and the uncertainty of the future seemed suffocating. He no longer looked at his cell phone with so much expectation. Each notification was just another charge, another worry. His heart filled with anxiety whenever his phone vibrated. But it was just a reminder that his situation hadn't changed yet. He no longer knew what to do, until, at the most unexpected moment, something happened. Lucas was sitting on the couch, lost in thought, when he heard the sound of the cell phone ringing. He looked at the screen, taking his time. I was already used to receiving calls that only brought more problems, but this time, the name that appeared on the screen made your heart race. It was someone he hadn't seen in years. an old friend, a person who was once very present in your life, but with whom you had lost contact over time. For an instant, Lucas hesitated. Why would this person be calling now? What could she want after so long? For a second, he thought about not answering, but something inside him drove him. With shaking hands, he slid his finger across the screen and brought the phone to his ear. Hello? On the other end of the line, the voice was familiar. It was as if no time had passed. But what that friend said next made Lucas feel a shiver run through his body. Man, I know it's been a long time since we last spoke, and maybe it seems strange, but today I woke up with a very strong feeling in my heart that I needed to call you. How are you? Lucas was silent for a few seconds. He swallowed hard. I don't even know how to answer that question. The friend continued talking, unaware of the depth of what was happening. I don't know what's happening to you, but God put it in my heart that I needed to talk to you today. And you know, I have an opportunity, something that could help you. Lucas couldn't believe what he was hearing. His heart started to beat faster. Could it be possible that that call was God's answer? He remembered the night he fell to his knees and cried out, Lord, if there is still a purpose for me, show me the way. And there was the path. God was responding. It wasn't the way Lucas imagined. It wasn't through an instant miracle. It wasn't through money falling from the sky or a problem solved overnight. It was through an unexpected connection that would change everything. The friend began to explain that he was involved in a new project and that he needed someone with the skills that Lucas had. It was exactly the kind of opportunity he had been waiting for. The answer came at the right time. Lucas held the cell phone tightly, trying to contain his emotion. The heart was racing. He could hardly believe what was happening. The tears came before he could hold them back. God's silence was never absence. At that moment, he realized something. God was already preparing everything from the beginning. And now, I ask you, have you ever experienced something like this? Have you ever felt like God was silent, but then realized that he was always working behind the scenes? Comment here. I trust in God's timing, and share your experience. Your story could be the answer someone needs today. Lucas remained holding the phone for a few moments, unable to contain his emotion. His friend's words still echoed in his mind. God had responded, not how he imagined, but in the exact way he needed. That unexpected call wasn't just about a job opportunity. It was a clear reminder that God never abandoned him, even when he seemed silent. Over the next few days, Lucas began to understand that his trial had not been a punishment, but a process. Everything that happened, every closed door, every tear shed, every sleepless night, everything was part of something bigger. The despair he felt was not meant to destroy him, but to teach him to trust. Bankruptcy, betrayal, illness, all of this led him to the lowest point in his life. But now he saw clearly, God never wanted your suffering. He just allowed Lucas to understand something he never would have realized on his own. If he hadn't lost everything, he would never have learned to truly trust. If you were still in control of everything, would never have surrendered. If God had responded sooner, the way Luke wanted, would he have learned anything? Or would he have gone back to trusting only himself? He began to reflect on all the times he tried to fight alone. How many times did you insist on resolving everything with your own strength? How many times have you ignored the signs that God wanted to lead you to something greater? Now he saw the difference. Now he understood. God didn't just restore your financial life, he restored their faith. Lucas accepted the opportunity offered by his friend, but with a different heart. Now he no longer placed his trust solely in money, business, or his own abilities. He understood that without God, any achievement is empty, and it was then that the true purpose was revealed. Lucas began to realize something powerful. His story wasn't just about him, it was about other people who were also suffering. He began to share his testimony. He began to talk about the despair he felt, about the sleepless nights, about the fear of the future, and about how God never abandoned him. And then something incredible started to happen. Other people began to identify themselves. He saw that many around him were facing the same doubts, the same fears, the same feeling that God was silent. And Wings, Lucas realized that his pain had a purpose. God restored him so he could restore others. God allowed him to pass through the desert so that now he could be a source of hope for those who were still in the storm. That failure that once seemed like the end became a powerful testimony. That pain that seemed unbearable became fuel to encourage others. And today, Luke can say with conviction, God is never late. He always responds at the right time. Now I ask you, have you ever been through a difficult situation and then realized it was God shaping you for something greater? Comment here, God has a purpose for everything, and share your experience. Your story can empower someone who is waiting for an answer today. If this story touched your heart, don't ignore this call. God always has a purpose, and this test you are facing may just be the beginning of a great transformation. Subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications to continue receiving messages of faith, hope, and testimonies that prove that God is never late. And if you've made it this far, I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a moment when God responded when you least expected it? Comment here, I trust in God's timing, and share your experience. Your comment could be the word of encouragement someone needs today. Just as Luke discovered that God is never late, there are times when the answer comes in a completely unexpected way. But what when God allows the race to get even more difficult before victory? Often, before the promise is fulfilled, the storm intensifies. In the next video, you will hear an amazing story of someone who was about to receive his blessing, but faced one last test that completely challenged his faith. And what happened next proves that God works in the details and has control of everything. Get ready for a testimony that will further strengthen your journey. Are you ready to see God act?